So this is the final teaching, the final Mishnah of Tractate Ta'anit, which is one of the tractates of the Mishnah, the Talmud, that deals with the laws of fasts. And it deals, as many conclusions of many tractates, they all end largely, all of them, on a very positive note. So here's the positive final teaching, as it were, of this tractate that deals with fast days. Let's read it together. I'm going to read and then comment. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, just in the English, there were no happier days. The Hebrew actually is Yom Tov. There were no greater Yomim Tovim for the Jewish people than the 15th of Av, which is coming up Friday, and the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. For on them, on these 2 days, the daughters of Jerusalem used to go out dressed in white garments which were borrowed, in order not to shame the one who had none. All the garments required immersion. We're going to explain all of this presently. And as the Mishnah goes on to say, they would go out to the vineyards, and the young men would also go out, and the objective was the day of shidduchim, of finding their respective partners in life. Okay, please put the paper down. Let me explain what we read so far, and then we'll explore it further. So what you just read was that Yom Kippur and the 15th of Av, there were no greater holidays in the year than these two days, and they were the days of young men and women meeting in the vineyards of Jerusalem, and you heard the details, which we'll explain also. The girls will go out, A, in white garments, and B, borrowed, and C, they were immersed in a mikveh first. And there were 3 categories of girls, as the Mishnah goes on to say. The beautiful ones, category 1, category 2, the girls of prestigious families, and category 3, the comely or not pretty, and not necessarily coming from prestigious homes either. 3 categories, and you just read what each one says. In summary, the beautiful girls say, look at me, choose me, young man, for a woman is created for beauty. The ones that come from pedigree, from prestigious families say, a woman ultimately is mother, family, so look at children, therefore marry me. The 3rd category says, young man, we have neither beauty nor pedigree, but make your choice for the sake of God, fear of heaven. As for our lack of beauty and pedigree, adorn us with jewels. That's the simple translation of what you just read, and now we'll try and explain this on a deeper level. Let's go back to the beginning. So the Gemara, the Talmud, now in addressing the Mishnah as it does, the Talmud, the Gemara explains and elaborates, elucidates the Mishnah. So the Gemara makes the following note. We can understand why Yom Kippur, that makes sense, because Yom Kippur, says the Gemara, is the day when God gave us the 2nd set of tablets. Right? The 2nd set of tablets after the sin of the golden calf. And Moishe Rabbeinu, Moses subsequently elicits God's forgiveness. And he comes down with the 2nd set of tablets. That day was Yom Kippur. There was some 80 days after the sin of the golden calf. And that's why it's Yom Kippur. Thereafter, God enshrined that day as a day of forgiveness unto all time, and the holiest day of the year. So the Gemara says, well, yes, we understand why Yom Kippur, but the 15th of Av, what happened on this day, that this day should be on par with Yom Kippur, and the day that that young men and women would meet for the purpose of marriage. And the Gemara goes on, it's not in the text in front of you, to give 7 events, 7 reasons, 7 events associated with the 15th of Av, which we have learned in the past. We printed out the list and examined each one of these events in detail. Before we get to the 15th of Av, let's go back to Yom Kippur. Now, I am willing to bet that before you learned this Mishnah, if I were to ask you to pick a day, when boy and girl meet and date, pick a day in the year where that would be a most appropriate day, I don't think you'd come up with Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, fast day, Day of Atonement, holiest day of the year, we're in synagogue all day. This surely is not the date of the big prom, the big social event of the year. So first it must be noted that in the times of the Mishnah, the synagogue didn't have the central role that it does today. What I'm saying is that people were not necessarily spending the entire day in the synagogue. First of all, if they lived anywhere near the precincts of the temple, they'd be in the Beit HaMikdash watching, observing the high priest serve on this day and being part of that incredible aura. As for the rest of the country, they would be in shul, but what I'm saying is the whole synagogue and its prayer ritual was really enacted after the destruction of the temple in place of the service in the temple. So there were synagogues, people did come together to pray, but not as formally as we do 3 times a day and every Shabbos and Yom Tov. That all really happens after the temple is destroyed. And this went on during temple times and even later. So that just answers why they wouldn't necessarily be in shul. But surely going out to the vineyards and dancing on Yom Kippur, the whole thing, I'm going to answer the question, unless you want to ask a question.
I wanted to, but how long is it okay?
To ask? Yeah.
How long, like when the Mishnah was compiled, were there synagogues yet, or how long did it take?
There were synagogues, as I'm saying, even during temple times. They're just not as central as they are today. Where now they become the focus because they replace the service in the temple. So, here they are on Yom Kippur dancing, and the young men are going out to meet. Kind of counterintuitive. Yeah. Yom Kippur. But upon reflection, on the contrary, what better day? Which is why the Talmud does not question why Yom Kippur. It just notes, of course, Yom Kippur. That's the day the second tablets are given. The Talmud only is curious or inquisitive or wants to know why the 15th of Av. Why is Yom Kippur given? Here's why. What better day to find your soulmate than on the most soulful day of the year? Yom Kippur is all about the soul. It's a day we transcend the body. So it's a profound statement as to what marriage is and what dating ought to be. Dating is not boy and girl go out and have a good time. That's not dating, that's using each other. That's abuse. It's consensual abuse. You use me, I'll use you. It's abuse nonetheless. And even, well, kind of, in some sense only, even worse than a more conventional kind of abuse, because I'm willingly submitting to this. What I can get out of you. This isn't a business or a barter or exchange of favors. That's not what marriage is. And marriage is soulmates, 2 halves of a soul becoming one. What better day than Yom Kippur? As for the dancing, Yom Kippur is not a sad day. Could there be a happier day than knowing that I can attain forgiveness, reclaim innocence, and cleanse? What could be happier than that? Yom Kippur is actually, in a sense, therefore, the happiest day of the year. Certainly in the Hasidic world, and actually it's now become universally observed. The songs and melodies of Yom Kippur are joyous, as they should be. cleansing, forgiveness, an opportunity to begin again, but not just begin again, but even deeper than I ever was before in my innocent days. Which leads to the next point. Yom Kippur, we said, was what? The day when the second tablets were given. So what's the story? We received history. We left Egypt, born, innocent. 7 weeks later, received the Torah. This is a giddying experience. It's all beautiful and wondrous and miraculous. And then, the golden calf. And then the teshuvah, the repentance, and the second set of tablets. Well, that's what marriage is. Before they were born, they were one soul. Born into the world, separated, different bodies, different families, even different genders. And then they find each other again and unite in the deepest way. Well, that's Yom Kippur. We were connected, we separated, we now reconnect deeper than ever before. That's the story of every marriage. So what better day, of course, than Yom Kippur to find your soulmate? Yom Kippur is precisely that. In other words, the soul and God are one in heaven before we're born. Soulmates are one in heaven before they're born. They come down to the world and they separate and don't even know of each other's existence, perhaps, for till their 20s or who knows when. Don't even know they exist. And then find each other, and then when they connect, it's immensely richer and deeper and truer than their connection to each other and God before they were born. We've discussed that at length. I'm just going to say this about it. Because their union before they were born, well, of course. Of course. There's no distraction. They recognize their soulmates. They're attracted to each other and nothing else. And nobody else. Soul and God, soul and soul. But coming down into a body, there's distractions, there are choices. It isn't so obvious. And so when you commit through this deep faith to each other, precisely because it's challenged by the world and others, that's what makes it so deep. So Yom Kippur, of course, Yom Kippur is the day for soulmates to find each other. Soulful day, joyous day, day of rebirth, day of reunion. Marriage is not a union, but it's a reunion. But what about the 15th of Av? So the Mishnah doesn't tell us, but I just told you earlier that the Talmud asks, what about the 15th of Av? We won't go into all of the stories, but they're all the same. The 15th of Av, if you look carefully at all of the events, which we will not list now, are all reconciliation, repairing, healing, the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av, which is the destruction of the home, the destruction of the home. Whose home? Us and God. Separation. Divorce on some level. Not ultimately. God, even spiritually, God will never divorce us, but certainly separation. And it's been a long separation. The 2,000-year, 1,900-year plus separation. That's Tisha B'Av. The 15th of Av, all of the 6 or 7 events, actually 7, listed in the Talmud are all the healing and the reunion of that separation, which will culminate when Mashiach comes. When we're back home again, rebuilding the home, this time forever. The same principle. There was a union, and then it was all fell apart. Alienation, separation, distance, alienation, division, and then finally healing. So again, these are historical events throughout history, recurringly on the 15th of Av. The underlying common thread of all of these events is where there had been division between Jews or Jews and God. It is now healed. Clear? In summary, in conclusion, therefore, the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur, these extraordinary days of soulmates reconnecting again. I'll just say this about the 15th of Av too. Two as in also. The 15th of Av is the 15th of the month. On the 15th day of every Jewish month, because our months are lunar calendars, they actually follow the cycle of the moon. The Gregorian or secular calendar is a solar calendar. It takes 365 days for the full rotation of the Earth around, well actually it's the sun around the Earth, but it's all relative. And it's divided into 12 and they're your months, and nothing to do with the moon. Our months have everything to do with the moon, and the 15th day of every Jewish month, the moon is full. And the symbolism, more than symbolism, what that is a reflection of is the alignment of us and God again, soulmates. We are the moon. The Jewish people is the bride. That's why the woman has the cycle, the monthly cycle, reflective of the moon. We are all, as we often point out here, essentially female. That's actually a scientific fact. We're all born female at birth, at conception. Rather, not at birth, at conception. The male chromosomes emerge only later. So we're all female, God, and we receive, like the moon receives the light from the sun, God symbolically the sun. So the 15th day of any month is the sun and the moon aligned. It's male and female aligned, God of the Jewish people, soulmates aligned. That's why these events happen on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Av, which is the month, pardon?
Friday.
This year it's Friday. The month of Av is the first part of it, separation, destruction, and the 15th, alignment, connection. Again, like Yom Kippur. Now let's look at the details again. So on a deep spiritual level, friends, the girls here are us, the Jewish people, in our reunion with God. And there are three categories. There's the beautiful, there is the ones of prestigious lineage, and the ones that lack for both, and call upon the chooser, God, to choose for the sake of heaven, but adorn us with jewels. Truth is, we have addressed that in the past, these three categories: the tzaddik, the saintly, the beinoni, the intermediate, and the not holy yet third category. We've also explained that the third category paradoxically is the deepest one. It was always that way. The paradox, the irony. But that's not our discussion today. I want to zero in on before they meet in the vineyard, the white borrowed clothing and what that means, spiritually speaking. Okay, so the simple meaning for the borrowed clothing is not to embarrass anyone who doesn't have. The Talmud goes into detail as to how this worked. There are actually, Lisa mentioned before, the two Talmuds. So there's a Babylonian Talmud and a Jerusalem Talmud. Two different opinions as to how this borrowing worked. Did you borrow down or up? By that I mean as follows. The king's daughter, the king is the most revered and the highest level within the Jewish people. Then comes the high priest. Then comes the vice high priest. Then comes the high priest anointed during times of war. And then comes the ordinary Kohen. And the rest of the population. So the view of the Babylonian Talmud is the king's daughter would borrow from the high priest. The high priest's daughter would borrow from the vice, and so on, lower. Jerusalem Talmud has the opposite. You would borrow from the level above you. If we have time, we'll get into, we don't, the spiritual significance of these two views. But the simple meaning again of the borrowing is not to embarrass one that doesn't have. White, my white clothing, symbolism of purity, innocence. Certainly at Yom Kippur, we dress in white by custom, day of cleansing and purity. Now deeper. the white clothing. And then we'll address why it's borrowed. But first, why white clothing? The color white, which doesn't have any definition to it, as it were, represents transcendence. The first step here, the first step in husband and wife, boy and girl meeting each other, building their home, likewise with God, is this white level. Meaning, the faith. By faith I mean, faith is a level of the soul that is higher than logic or understanding. It must stem from a level that this is meant to be. That the one I end up with is meant to be, and in fact is, my other half, even though we're not prophets or mystics, that we could actually see and appreciate that later on. As we build a life together, that should become appreciated more and more by the mind and by the heart. But certainly at the beginning of the relationship, it's based on faith. As much as we have, dated and discussed and so on, you never know the person till you live together, and certainly not, for a long time. And here's the irony of all of this is, so people would say, well, in that case, live together first and then decide to marry. Fact is, people live together before they marry. Their marriages statistically have a lesser chance of working. Yeah. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Because no matter what, it's not the same as being married. There's just something that changes the dynamic. No matter how you were before, it's not the same afterwards, and you don't relate to it the same afterwards. All to say that to begin with, it's a question of faith, and you've got to go into it with this deep faith. When you stand under the chuppah, you approach that with, this is meant to be. That's represented also by the chuppah. The chuppah that hovers over bride and groom means many things. It means their home. Symbolic of the home they're going to build together. He's kind of taking her, inviting her into his home. But it also represents a level that's beyond the mind, the head, consciousness. They're committed on a level that is supra-rational, beyond understanding, beyond even feeling. A deep level of the soul. That's how it must begin. That's the meaning of the white garment with which they come. She comes to the vineyard. And why it's borrowed. Spiritually, what's the significance of it being borrowed is as follows. Borrowed implies you kind of give it back. It's not a permanent state. That's what borrowed implies, right? Clear? Here is the profound message, as I was saying moments ago. The foundation of marriage is, I believe, by divine providence, we met, we went out. The mind says, look, you met this guy. So there are thousands of people out there. You just happen to be the same city or somewhere. There's still lots of possibilities, even though it makes sense to you. Of course, it has to on some level. You don't date blindly. You've got to go and even in arranged marriages, as they used to be years ago, the law is they've got to see each other before. You cannot come to the chuppah without knowing who that person on some rudimentary level. And if you don't like what you see, then it's off. But still the mind says, how much experience do I have? What do I know? I met this guy. And then, you meet somebody else and hey, he seems more interesting and so on. So there's got to be this element of faith. You've got to, when you stand under the chuppah, that's got to be the foundation. This is meant to be with two halves of one soul, etc. But it's a borrowed thing. Why is it borrowed? It can't remain there. As I said before, the rest of marriage has to be a meeting of minds and hearts and appreciation of each other so that I understand why it's meant to be and I feel why we're meant for each other. It can't be just on the faith level. In other words, it can't be this. You're married, you believe in each other. I don't have to understand you. I don't have to... Whatever you say, I'll do because I'm committed to you. So here's a scenario where, in theory, Husband and wife believe they're meant to be, but they're not talking, they're not engaging, but they're loyal. They're going to be loyal. They're not going to, God forbid, violate the marriage. But that's no marriage. They're not sharing feelings, thoughts, understanding. They're not appreciating and growing. So it can't be just faith alone. That has to recede as a foundation. Now it's the business of living together, of communication. And communication means discussion, invariably miscommunication, which leads then to deeper communication. There's got to be a meeting of hearts and minds, and that's where the work is. So that's why it's a borrowed thing, because that's how it comes. That's how it starts. Borrowed in the sense, don't hang on to that as the only component of your marriage thereafter. It's going to remain the foundation, but now the business of your relationship is spending time enjoying each other and understanding each other, so that the mind and the heart can appreciate why you are soulmates, even on the intellectual and emotional level. Yeah?
Where is the word borrow comes from? You know what I mean? When they got married,
Here in the Mishnah, it says they use borrowed clothing. Borrowed white clothing.
But when you're saying they are getting married and they are under the chuppah and they promise to each other face and so on to complete each other.
Yes, yeah.
What am I borrowing there?
The borrowing is that cannot be the permanent state. Just like when you borrow something, you give it back. So here under the chuppah, it's all faith. That's got to be kind of given back, recede to the background, and from the chuppah on, it's got to be a conscious engagement of mind and heart. Let me answer your question even better.
Okay.
Borrowing implies it's not mine. It's thanks to.
It's not mine.
Yeah. So, thanks for asking, because we're going to zero in and make this even clearer.
Okay.
That we are soulmates is not my doing. It's not my doing. This was determined by God before we're born. We are two halves of one soul.
Okay.
That isn't my choice. It's been granted to me. It's with that awareness that I come to the chuppah.
Okay.
Borrowed means it's not my. God brought us together because it's meant to be. And I've got to recognize that this is divinely ordained. It's granted. It's a gift. So in that sense, it's borrowed. It is not my choice or achievement. Then after that, after the chuppah, now we have to work on making it work and gelling together mind and heart. That's my contribution. The fact that we're meant to be, that's God's doing. Is it going to work? And am I going to celebrate this? Am I going to appreciate this with mind, heart, and body? That's what I have to invest. That's not borrowed. That's what I have to give. But it's all based on the gift of heaven. And therefore it's called a borrowed white clothing, meaning to say, this is Hashem's doing. You've got to be open to it. But you've got to be open to, how are you open to it? Faith. So in simple language, when you stand under the chuppah, the attitude is, this is not my choice. And this is, God brought us together. And that's the foundation. We're meant to be. It couldn't be any other way. God did it. Great. That's what Hashem did. Now, with that foundation, you work on it and you invest in your relationship. So it recedes to the background. You kind of thank you. Now we're going to work on this. Not that it's removed from you. It remains as it's like a super conscious given, but it's not the stuff of life. The stuff of life is connecting, sharing with the ups and downs. And the objective is that our union that is meant to be, and it's godly and spiritual and soulful, I understand this. I appreciate this. We mesh on all of these levels. That's work and hard work. But it'll be successful if it's based on the faith that meant to be. This white transcendent truth. Are we clear on the symbolism here? Mm-hmm. So that explains the white clothing and the borrowed clothing. Now it's immersed in the mikveh. Simple. Why was it immersed in the mikveh? These clothing. Okay, this requires a bit of considerable background knowledge of the laws of purity and impurity. I'm just going to tell you this. during temple times, which is when this happened, many people, certainly Kohanim, but even the general population, abided by the laws of ritual purity, lived, where possible, ritually pure. Not everybody did. So therefore, it's possible that the garment had been worn by the other girl in a state of ritual impurity, which can be a host number of things. Host number of things. Not to embarrass anybody, all of them are immersed. Same idea. All the garments are immersed so that they're definitely ritually pure, so that the highest standard is kept universally for everyone. That's the simple meaning. What it means spiritually is bride and groom, on the day of their marriage, this is kind of the day when they're coming to the chuppah, Hashem does this. He cleanses us of all of our past. Purification. We come to the chuppah reborn. It's all part of the white clothing. It's that level of the soul that's pure, is bestowed upon us. We are washed with it. We are washed with that pure soul level where we were once before we were born. Pure, that's now bestowed upon us. A gift on this day. Again, the idea of being borrowed, it's bestowed upon us. In the words of our sages, the day a person marries, he's forgiven for all of his sins. He and she. That's this mikveh. It's cleansing, washing. Mikveh is a return to the womb. Quite symbolically and almost literally, we immerse in the water, the womb, and we come out reborn. That's what happens on the day of one's wedding. And Yom Kippur is also that. And the 15th of Av. It's all one. So we've explained so far the following. We've explained why white clothing. We've explained why the spiritual significance of being borrowed. The vineyards of Jerusalem. Why there? Well, it's a romantic place to go. Vineyards and so on. But symbolism, wine, joy, of course, that's the most joyous, it's the most joyous event, and that their life should be a life of constant celebration. But there's a deeper symbolism. Wine has the salutary effect of revealing the secrets. When the wine goes in, the secrets come out. So what's happening here is something that was hidden before, soulmates before they were born, is now being revealed. And their life should be an intoxicatingly joyous celebration. Again, no fairy tale, there's ups and downs, but it will work if it's based on the white faith, the garment borrowed, bequeathed, the gift that God grants us, if we only want to take it. And Jerusalem, why the vineyards of Jerusalem? The Hebrew word for Jerusalem is Yerushalayim. There's a very important message here. What does Yerushalayim mean? It actually means something. Yireh Shalem, perfect awe. Yirah, Yirah Shlema, Yerushalayim, perfect awe, or fear. Now this is strange, friends, because you would think that what would be the emotion that surely is kind of at the foundation of a relationship is love, not awe. But it's not so. Love comes second. First there has to be awe and respect. And the awe and respect has many levels. And one of them is, maybe the basic awe and respect is the privilege to be married to you. The privilege that God has granted me, that I am whole again with my other soulmate. That's even deeper than love. And as we've discussed here in the past, in relationships, respect is deeper than love, because love is self-fulfilling. I love you, you fill me. I'm filled with your presence. Respect is, I make space for your presence. Put self aside for your needs. So, where are they going out to find each other? There are no illusions of being madly in love. You work at love for the rest of your life. You don't fall into love. But respect, that's the foundation. come into this relationship with the element of respect, of the privilege to be in a relationship with another, with your soulmate, and that's the foundation. Fear of God, and then comes love of God. So that explains the detail too now of the vineyard, and where's the vineyard, the joy and the celebration, the wine, the secrets coming out, and so on. Where in the city of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Yirash Lima, perfect or wholesome awe or fear. I don't mean fear in the quaking sense, but fear in the respectful sense. Stepping back and being in awe and in wonder of this incredible gift, which we should never take for granted ever, even in our long and productive and fulfilling life. All right, friends. Then we talk about the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, these two views and their spiritual significance, whether you borrowed up or you borrowed down. The Jerusalem Talmud says that the higher borrowed from the lower. Did I say Jerusalem? Sorry, Babylonian Talmud. Jerusalem Talmud has borrowing from the station above you, but to explain all of that, God willing, I guess, on some other time. But maybe I'm going to say this. I will say this. The Babylonian Talmud says you borrow down. You're borrowing this white, so the king's daughter borrows from the high priest. Now she, of course, has to borrow. She borrows lower, and so it goes down the chain. Exactly. So the question is, but how does this fit with what we were just saying moments ago, that the white garments represents the transcendent level of the soul, where we are one? So are we borrowing from symbolically from a station lower? It should fit with borrowing from a station higher, since the white garments represent the soul level before we were born. So if we were going to point to a direction of borrowing, it should be up, not down. So the answer to that is kind of something we said before. And that is that the deepest level of the soul is unlocked only when it comes down into the body. This paradox. The union that we had with God before we were born is beautiful and perfect and glorious. But the union we effect with God by doing a mitzvah here in this world in a body, precisely because there's choice and there's challenge, and it comes through commitment and work, is a deeper one than we had above. So going down is really ultimately unlocking the depth of our soul. What that means in terms of marriage is this. Again, it means that husband and wife reunited here on earth, soulmates, is actually a deeper connection than the soulmates were in heaven. Unchallenged, obvious, given, no effort, no work, no investment, no sacrifice. Here it requires investment, work, and sacrifice to keep the relationship and deepen it. And it also means, as we said before, invariably, there are these moments of separation, of pain, alienation, and hurt in any relationship. And in a way, especially in marriage, because you're so close. So the same thing that he would say to somebody else, that other person, big deal. He says it to me, it's very painful. It's my husband or my wife. We're much more vulnerable in the husband and wife relationship, so the pain is deeper. We're more vulnerable, we're more exposed. But here's the point. All of these inevitable miscommunication or moments of alienation and hurt become, if we still maintain the faith, that white level. If we don't give up on the relationship and say, I don't need this, and walk away, but if we believe this is my soulmate. So what happens? We dig deeper. The alienation compels us to dig even deeper and connect on an even deeper level than ever before. So the separation actually is the means by, or the distance for a deepening union. And of course, that's mikveh. Mikveh, which is husband and wife separating and coming together. That's not an imposition on their relationship. It's actually what the relationship is all about. This constant, on one level, separation. Again, they come from different backgrounds at very best. They're different histories, different even cultures sometimes. And they come together, and it's the separation that makes that union even deeper. And mikveh nurtures that truth.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So how come a woman, after menopause, how can they maintain that separation and coming together because they no longer have to go to the
They no longer have that. So the truth is, in theory, if they till then had mikveh in place, it carries them. It carries them. But what if they didn't? They only found out about mikveh later, and she goes only once. That one time will do it. That one time of separation and coming together will remain forever the inspiration for the separation and union that happens on all of its levels in their long, productive life together. So all to say, friends, the 15th of Av is a great Yom Tov. It's about soulmates reconnecting with each other, with Hashem, in the deepest and most joyous way. And when will that be fully realized, of course, is the rebuilding of our home once again. That's the third Bet HaMikdash, and that's why we didn't go through the whole text here, but you notice the end of the text, the Mishnah segued into talking about the final redemption, because that's what this is all about. It's the ultimate reconciliation of Hashem and us, and when will that be realized fully for all of us, and individually and collectively, when Mashiach comes? May we merit that without delay, so that the 15th of Av be truly a great and eternal celebration.